Hey Switch 2 fans, welcome back to another video. I'm Blaze2K, and today's kind of breaking news, or at least yesterday was breaking news, that the Switch 2's DI, system on a chip, was actually leaked and taken apart in a teardown, and we finally have some comparisons as to how powerful this thing is, how it compares to graphics cards on the market, you know, what kind of performance we can come to expect from the new Nintendo Switch chip, I guess. And they were able to emulate real-world performance using a comparable system to the console's Tegra T239 chip, and we're going to take a look at it in this video. But first, like, subscribe, click the bell icon for the latest, the greatest Switch 2 news on this channel, in the world. I put out multiple videos every day to try and keep you guys up to date. And if you also love gaming, tech, all that stuff in between as well, then you'll find a place here. Also, check the links down below in the video description for some really great Nintendo Switch 2 accessories as well, okay? Including those new microSD Express cards. And if you haven't secured a Switch 2 yet, then I definitely recommend you check out our Switch 2 stock tracker, which will play a loud alarm the second the Switch 2 restocks at all the major US retailers. So here's a tweet from Colonel Salts, the world's first Nintendo Switch 2 die shot, Samsung 8N, so 8 nanometers process. I believe that is not the best, considering the Steam Deck is actually running on the 6 nanometer process, and several competitors are 4 nanometer already. So already it's a little bit outdated as far as how many transistors are squeezed onto the chip here. 8 nanometer versus 4 and 6 in competing devices. Not a good sign straight from the get-go. And they're saying the emulated docked performance is comparable to a GTX 1050 Ti. And the YouTuber Geekerwan actually showed off the chip and also compares it, does a bunch of benchmarks showing the differences and how this compares to other devices, and we're going to take a look at that in this video. So let's get into it, shall we? And let's react.
What I'm holding right here is the motherboard of a Nintendo Switch 2. Hard to believe, right? I mean, the console itself isn't even on the shelf yet, so how did we get our hands on this board? Well, it all thanks to Xianyu, which is basically Chinese eBay. At first, we thought that was just kind of,
Thank God for Chinese eBay, huh?
Parody. But then we zoomed in on the photos, and according to the double Type-C port and the package of the CPU, holy cow, that is the real deal. And we just bought this Switch 2 motherboard for about 150 bucks.
150 bucks for a Switch 2 motherboard before the Switch 2 comes out. That is pretty sick.
I actually tried to power it up, but unfortunately it didn't boot at all. So I'm not sure if it's damaged or missing parts or just an unfinished sample straight from the factory. Either way, we obviously can't build a full Switch 2 out of it, let alone play any games on it.
There will be somebody out there that can make a Franken Switch 2. And we need to get it to that person. Whoever you are, let us know in the comment section down below if you're willing to build the Switch 2 and beat Nintendo to the release date. That would be amazing. Can you imagine if someone got this thing working and got a legit Nintendo Switch 2 working on this thing? That would be insane before the release date. How would Nintendo react?
What we can do is to reverse engineer this NVIDIA chip on Switch 2. We can use a microscope or grind it down to get a die shot and figure out exactly what kind of hardware the Switch 2 is packing, how many CPU cores, what's the GPU spec. We will find out very soon. On top of that, we can send it in for FIPSAM analysis to check whether it's built on Samsung's 8 nanometer or 5 nanometer process. And if that is not enough, we'll also benchmark a laptop GPU with similar specs to estimate the performance of the Switch 2. Anyway, let's dive into the heart of the Nintendo Switch 2.
I'm ready, let's go. Let's compare it to a laptop. So they're comparing it with a 2050 Ti. Or is that 2050 Ti, did they say? Or is it just a 2050 laptop chip? Either way, let's get...
Not on the high density side when it comes to PCBs.
I don't know if I recorded that, but I was saying... You can tell it's a Switch 2 because it has the two USB-C ports, one on the top, one on the bottom here.
Integration level. But let's take a look at the main components we have here. On the flip side, there's Hynix 256 gigs, TLC UFS 3.1 storage, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth from MediaTek, Realtek Audio, plus a two-phase PMIC powering the SoC, pumping up to 34.4 watts of power. But don't worry, the Switch 2's SoC itself blips way less than that. Back to the front, the PCB stamped week 36, 2024, and here's the DRAMs around the SoC. Two 6GB Hynix LPDDR5X chips round up a total of 12 GB of RAMs.
Not bad.
128-bit wide, rated at
Ideally, as for a handheld gaming PC at least, I like 16 to 32 gigs, but hey, it's a Switch 2, it's heavily optimized.
At 8533 mega transfer per second, but it will almost certainly be downclocked by Nintendo as usual. And here in the middle is our rockstar, the SoC from NVIDIA. A massive 207 square millimeter die, nearly double the size of a Tegra X1 from the OG Switch, let alone the smaller variants from the Switch OLED. In comparison, we got our RTX 3050 Ti's GA107, AMD's Ryzen 7840H, Apple M2, and Qualcomm's X Elite. And Switch 2's die size is bigger than any of them above. But I have to remind you, bigger doesn't mean beefier. Because the size largely depends on the fabrication process, on the transistor density, let's say. As the part number suggests, the chip is called GMLX30 Rev A1. It's from Samsung's fabrication and packaged on week 21, 2024 in Taiwan. And now it's time to decap the chip and dig a bit further. We first use a metallurgical microscope to peek at the metal layers, because you'll often find some marks from the makers up there. And we instantly spotted NVIDIA's stamp. Well, the Switch 2's chip really is called T239. I swear I saw that rumor during COVID time, and today we finally got it proved. As you can see, T239 isn't exactly a new chip.
So the T239 was basically a 4-year-old chip at this point, and that lines up with a lot of the rumors that we saw back in 2021. As you know, a lot of the rumors for the Switch 2 came out back in 2021. People so much as expected the Switch 2 to be released in 2021, and obviously it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. Clearly now we think that could be to do with the fact that a lot of the games were not ready for the Switch 2 back then. Clearly, I mean, shoot, Metroid, we still don't have a release date for Metroid. Donkey Kong is coming out in July, not at launch. So yeah, that's not surprising. So yeah, Switch 2 is already running on a 4-year-old chip. Disappointing slightly, but we kind of already knew that.
It got taped out back in 2021. For comparison, we also decapped a GA107 taped out in 2020 and released in 2021, a typical 1-year gap. So the 4-year gap for the T239 is certainly quite long. And it kind of backs up the whisper that Switch 2 was supposed to launch earlier, but got pushed to 2025.
Yep,
and now
there we go.
Let's grind the chip and see what's inside. This is a die shot of a T239. To be honest with you, the layout looks quite messy comparing to other Tegra chips like O-Ring. What we can definitely spot here for now might only be the CPU cores, GPU cores, and memory controllers. So this is the octa-core A78C CPU cluster on T239. We got 4 MB of shared level 3 cache in the middle, and each core has its individual 256K level 2 cache within. Funny enough, a single A78C core on the T239 is exactly the same size as the A78AE core on O-Ring, which uses Samsung's 8nm process. So yeah, that definitely hints something, I guess.
So yeah, basically 8nm as opposed to the 6nm on the Switch 2, on the Steam Deck, and 4nm process for, you know, other competing devices. So as we know, it's a 4-year-old chip. It's running on an older process from Samsung, which just means it's going to be a little bit bigger. You know, they've managed to shrink down a lot of this stuff into a smaller die on newer devices. But I mean, that's what you expect from a 4-year-old chip, right? So let's move on. More importantly, let's skip a lot of this. If you want to go see his video, I'd definitely recommend Switch 2 CPU Geekerwan on YouTube if you want to delve into the nitty-gritty. But let's take a look at the benchmarks and let's see what we're going to get.
You know, based on the clock speed that leaked a few months ago. So first off, GPU performance. The closest thing to match T239 on PC is a massively downclocked RTX 2050, a laptop GPU based on Ampere's GA107 with 2048 CUDA cores. It's like a 3050 but with a 64-bit mirror bus, thus much lower bandwidth, similar to Switch 2. In order to mimic T239, we have to downclock the 2050 from its original 1600 MHz to 755 MHz for dock mode, and all the way down to 421 MHz for handheld. And we have to turn down the memory clocks as well. That is no easy feat because NVIDIA enforces minimum clock limits in OC tools like MSI Afterburner. So I turned to my friends at NVIDIA to help me out, and we used some internal tools to achieve the impossible clock speed. Even then, handheld mode at 421 MHz is still tricky, so I decided to just cut the TGP to about 17 to 19 watts, and at least we can get closer to the clocks we want. I also dropped some mem clocks by changing the P state. Well, it still can't quite.
So kudos to Geekerwan here for basically going out his way to try and downclock and make a comparable alternative to the this chip in the Switch 2.
The leaked bandwidth.
It looks like he did a lot of work to try and make something comparable to the Switch 2's APU.
But this is as close as we can get to a Switch 2 simulation.
So, 3D Mark, 9 frames a second.
Let's kick off with GPU benchmarks from 3D Mark, still known as Lite.
Alright, so this is the meat and potatoes of this video that I wanted to cover here, okay? We're taking a look at performance here. So let's just zoom this out into the full screen view. So let's take a look. So this is 3D Mark Steel Nomad. If you don't know what 3D Mark is, basically it's a 3D GPU benchmarking software that you can run on PC. So the Switch 2 in docked mode here is comparable to a 1050 Ti. Now, if we look at the Steam Deck here in handheld mode, the Switch 2 is very comparable actually to the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck's Van Gogh APU, RDNA 2, it's AMD, gets 1443 in handheld mode, and for Steam Deck, assumably docked mode as well, because you can't crank up past 15 watts on Steam Deck. So Steam Deck, you're just going to get a flat 1443 performance on 3D Mark. Switch 2 handheld, 1308, so slightly less than the Steam Deck. But where it ramps up a little bit is when the Switch 2 is docked. We're looking at 2205. Which is comparable to a 1050 Ti. It's actually higher than an Apple M1's, funnily enough, but it's not quite up there next to the Xbox Series S, which is a little bit disappointing because we did see yesterday when we talked about the new Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer, and we saw that it was coming to the Series S. I said, well, if it can run on the Series S, surely it should be able to run on the Nintendo Switch 2, right? That's if the Switch 2 is docked, and even then, with the Switch 2 docked, we're still not at the 3786 that the Series S is getting. So, Grand Theft Auto 6 on the Switch 2, it's looking less likely by the day. But as you can see, it's still very close to a PS4. So, a PS4 is getting 1219, and the Switch 2 is 1308. So, all the rumors saying that the Switch 2 was very comparable to a PS4, not a PS4 Pro, were very accurate. It's actually a little bit more powerful than the base standard PS4, which is good to hear, and that's in handheld mode, and it's significantly better than a PS4 when it's docked, which is pretty damn good, right? And now let's compare it to the PS5, okay? Because PS5 and Xbox Series S are current gen systems. The simulated PS5 is getting 9,590. That's 430%, and a 3060, 400% more than the Switch 2 in docked mode, which is absolutely nuts. So for anyone that thinks the Switch 2 is comparable to a PS5, there you go. The PS5 is 430% more powerful than the Switch 2 when the Switch 2 is docked. Way more as well than Switch 2 in handheld mode, right? So it's not even close. But yeah, that is interesting though. The Switch 2 in handheld mode is very comparable to a Steam Deck and more powerful than a PS4. So it's still not going to be no slouch in handheld mode. But I'm quite surprised that it goes up so much in docked mode. Obviously, it is going to be cooled. The dock does have a fan in it, we found out. So, that it's going to cool it down when it's running at those higher clocks. But yeah, to see it up there, higher than an Apple M1 for graphics performance, but up there next to a 1050 Ti, it's pretty impressive. I wished it was more in the 3000 range. That would be really nice. Having it comparable with a Series S, that would be nice. But yeah, so far, it's not too bad.
If the leaked clock speed is actually true, so there are still mysteries to uncover. Now let's try some games for the sake of simulation. Cyberpunk 2077 is going to launch on day 1 for Switch 2, and CDPR has already partially confirmed the graphic targets. So let's see how. So
that's 1080. So in docked mode, CD Projekt Red are aiming for 1080p at 30, and for performance mode, 1080p at 40 FPS. Interesting. Okay. Dynamic resolution with DLSS. Handheld mode, they're aiming for 1080p at 30. Performance mode 720p at 40 FPS. Gotcha. Okay, nice.
How it might actually looks like. This is a simulation of docked quality mode with DLSS quality CNN model.
Interesting. So this is the Switch 2 playing the PC version of Cyberpunk 2077 at quality mode with DLSS set to quality mode, all low presets at 1080p, and it's getting a 36
30 FPS at low
FPS. That's not bad.
1080p, so it's
40
rendering. But it might sound a little bit mediocre, but it actually looks pretty decent and clear, right?
That does look pretty
Remember,
clear.
The real Switch 2 version will be using dynamic res, so it can only be even better than this. And this is how docked performance mode looks like.
That ain't bad.
1080p output, I'm using DLSS performance, so it runs at 40 FPS.
Not bad, huh?
1080p rendering. Then handheld quality
Really not bad.
basically the same graphics with a 30 FPS target. And finally, handheld performance mode. This is the one I'm quite concerned about. 720p output DLSS performance, so it's only 360p rendering, targeted at 40 FPS. Well, what do you think of the graphics? It's obviously quite blurry for me, but somehow still playable on the portable screen. And I have to say, DLSS really saves the day here. I've never used a DLSS under such a low resolution before, but
I mean, that's 360p. Scale up to 720p using DLSS. It looks horrible. I'm not gonna lie, on my 27-inch 1440p display, but on a small, on the Switch 2 display, it might look more playable.
it just works unbelievably well. Of course, all of this is based on our PC simulation, and the real Switch 2 build will get further engine-level optimization, so just keep that in mind.
So yeah, the Switch 2 will get more in engine optimization.
This Wukong on our Switch 2 counterpart.
Oh, Black Myth Wukong.
And it actually runs okay, at least in docked mode. We're hitting 30 FPS with 1080p low preset DLSS balanced. Even in some high pressure thing like the opening here, we can get a pretty playable experience. But the graphics will hit hard if you want higher frame rates. You can get around 40 FPS with DLSS Ultra performance, but it looks like trash. And it does get even harder by switching to handheld, 720p low with DLSS Ultra performance. We're not even getting 30 here. I guess a Switch 2 port of Black Myth Wukong is technically possible, but the devs will have tons of work to do before it can really shine on this hardware. And speaking of possibility, do you know what is not possible for Switch 2? Well, it's Monster Hunter Wilds.
Oh no, I love this game, but thankfully, what I'm actually doing is I'm streaming the. I'm playing Monster Hunter Wilds right now on my Steam Deck, but not running it on the Steam Deck. I'm actually streaming it from my gaming PC back here to my Steam Deck using Moonlight. So I'm playing Monster Hunter Wilds on the go, but I have to be in my house. I can't take it out and about. But yeah, Monster Hunter Wilds is notoriously badly optimized, so this will be funny.
We're not even getting 30 FPS in dock mode, 720p.
Oh, that looks horrible.
Ultra performance. Just look at the graphics. Damn, this should be illegal. And not to mention the handheld mode. I don't even think it's worth saving. But lucky enough, there are better optimized AAA titles out there. For example, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 runs at 1080p medium setting DLSS performance in dock mode simulation. And we got a smooth 30 to 40 FPS. Handheld runs at 720p medium with DLSS performance, and it can also reach 30 FPS. And online games like Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, and Warzone 2.0 can also have a chance to get a Switch.
So this is, what is this? Black Ops 6?
With solid performance. I'm talking about over 50 FPS at 1080p low with DLSS Ultra performance in dock mode, and over 40 FPS at 720p DLSS Ultra.
Oh yeah, Call of Duty is going to have a lot of work on their hands. Ideally, if you're playing a first-person shooter like Call of Duty, you're really going to need 60 frames minimum, right? If you want to be competitive. So 40 FPS in a first-person shooter like COD is not acceptable, but I think Activision Blizzard and Microsoft and Xbox, who obviously own Activision, are going to have to do their homework and get this thing optimized for the Switch 2.
Handheld. Alright.
It's not going to just be a case of slapping it on there, pouring it over, and then calling it a day. It's going to need like in-system optimization.
So right now, you got a rough idea of what the T239's GPU can do. But what about its CPU? It's packing 8 A78C.
Alright, let's take a look at the Geekbench ones compared to the Steam Deck. So the Switch 2 docked in handheld mode. Oh no! The Steam Deck destroys it. Okay, so a score of 526. It's getting a lower score docked for CPU, 493, 526 in handheld mode for CPU single core performance, and 2877 multi-core performance, whereas the Steam Deck is 4364 multi-core and 1262 PS5. That's crazy. The Steam Deck gets a higher single core performance than the PS5, which is wild. And it's not actually that far behind the PS5 as far as multi-core. For CPU, like the table just got flipped upside down. Wow. I guess a lot of games are really bottlenecked by the GPU these days, so I wouldn't read too far into this. I wouldn't say, oh, you know, the Steam Deck's almost close to a PS5. That means the Steam Deck is as powerful as a PS5. No, this is just CPU performance, and not a lot of games are bottlenecked by their CPU. They're mainly GPU bound.
1.1 gigahertz and 1 gigahertz. Running Geekbench 6, the results were underwhelming.
That's an understatement.
Compared to its GPU's
an overstatement.
Batch
I don't know.
showing, the Switch 2 CPU just can't keep up. It only delivers about 66% of Steam Deck's multi-core score. And that's against a 4-core Zen 2 chip that's already only half the size of a PS5 CPU.
Keep in mind, the Steam Deck is roughly about the same price now. The base Steam Deck with the LCD display is roughly about the same price as a Switch 2 now. So,
The Switch 2 actually lands closer to something like a 10-year-old laptop Haswell i7. If you compare it to mobile CPUs, it's somewhere between a Snapdragon 855 and an Apple A12. That definitely sounds a bit mediocre for 2025. But compared to the Tegra X1 of OG Switch or the PS4's Jaguar CPUs, this is still a massive leap, roughly 6 times the performance over the last gen. So yes, it's not breaking any speed records in 2025, but it's still a serious upgrade. Also, that's far easier to smooth out. And it gets even better with Black Myth Wukong. On the same chip, it still cranks out 40 to 50 FPS of CPU frames. With T239's graphics power, the CPU might not even be the bottleneck here. And if you've got a studio with ninja-level optimization chops like id Software, the Doom Eternal will hit a buttery smooth 120 FPS on that crappy CPU, fully leveraging a 120Hz display. I also simulate this performance on mobile using a Dimensity 8400 downclocked to 1 GHz. And you know what? Many mobile titles might as well struggle a bit with this type of CPU performance. Genshin Impact runs around 30 to 40 FPS in the worst thing, and Wuthering Wave mostly hovers in the same range but drops into surprising visual fidelity.
So there we go, guys. Basically, that is the performance of the Switch 2. In CPU is a little bit underwhelming, as you saw there. A little bit of a disappointment. But hey, Nintendo first-party games are still going to take advantage of it and still look absolutely beautiful. And like I says, a lot of these games, you know, they will get, you know, optimization specific for the Switch 2. The Switch 2 isn't going to brute force its way through games and just run games that are just ported overnight to it and run them amazingly well. It is going to take work. You know, if you do want a handheld system that does get games at launch day, that does have the best of the best in terms of hardware for handheld gaming, you know, you are obviously still going to have to go for handheld gaming PCs like the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, etc, etc. But as far as a Nintendo console is concerned, the GPU performance is still pretty damn impressive. I mean, in docked mode, it trounces the Steam Deck still, and GPU is where it matters for a lot of these games, so I'm happy to see that. In docked mode, this thing's going to look beautiful, and it's going to be worthy of your money. I wish it was cheaper, and I've been beating that drum constantly constantly in the past couple of videos talking about, is the Switch 2 worth it for the price? I think they've taken some liberties as far as pricing is concerned here in the US, considering it's $311 in the US and it's $425 in the United Kingdom. And that's after taxes, where it's $450 in the US, $25 more than the UK before taxes. So yeah, it's. I think they've got room to bring the price down. And watch my other video, we actually talked about that, where an analyst actually came out and said they think Nintendo's gonna, for the first time, lower the price of the Switch 2 over time, and I hope that's the case. Anyways, let me know what you think about the performance. Obviously, it's good to see these little leaked details about the Switch 2's APU and CPU SoC, and it's good to see, you know, somebody, credit where credit is due to Geekerwan over on YouTube here, who actually created a simulated Switch 2 to show us what kind of performance we're likely to get from games. And it basically just, you know, reinforces the fact that developers, if you're wanting your games to run the best they can on Switch 2, it will require a lot of optimization specifically for the Switch 2's hardware, and it's not going to be easy, but it's by no means impossible, and hopefully we all benefit from it. Because if developers have a history, right, of under optimizing games are notoriously bad sometimes. Look at the new Monster Hunter game, right? Obviously that is severely hindered by its optimization. Stalker 2 as well. Unreal Engine 5 has been an absolute dog to get games running well on lower end hardware. So hopefully something like the Nintendo Switch 2 really encourages developers to go out their way to optimize games for lower end systems, right? And I think we'll all win in the end, right? Because good optimization means we get to run games at higher frame rates, at higher quality, at higher resolutions, without needing a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 gaming PC to do it. And this can only be a good thing for the gaming industry as a whole. So kudos to Nintendo for, you know, championing the lower end hardware market and allowing people with a 5-year-old laptop to be able to play more modern games. It's because of the Switch 2 that happens, because developers are putting more of a focus on optimizing games to run on lower end hardware, and I think that's great, and we all win if that's the case. So yeah, I'm Blaze2K, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, click the bell icon. If you like this deep dive, go check out Geekerwan's YouTube video for the entire scoop without me skimming through anything, if you really want to dive in deep to it. Check out our links in the description for Switch 2 accessories, as well as those micro SD cards that everyone's trying to get. They're available right now from Adorama and SanDisk.com. And if you haven't secured a Switch 2 yet, check out our restock tracker for the Switch 2 over on my channel, link in the description as well. It's a 24-hour stock tracking stream with a great community and a great live chat where people are always talking about Nintendo Switch 2. All the news for Switch 2 on the right hand side of the stream, stock tracker that plays an alarm the second it restocks at any retailer, and yeah, sometimes I'm in the bottom corner just chatting away to you guys and also playing games. So have a wonderful day, take care, see you in the next one, bye.
Let's go.